Hello, welcome back to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing. It's myself, Matty Hewitt. I'm back. I've had a week away, just getting a bathroom fitted, so obviously I didn't want to put you through all the drilling and banging. I'm back, Joe. How are you? How are you doing?
Um, Still trying to do a little bit of soul searching. I think from that on Saturday,
Yeah,
it was a long afternoon, wasn't it?
yeah. It's a tough sort of time at the minute, isn't it? The club. I mean, we'll get on to obviously where they're at in a minute. But yeah, We Are Sunderland, obviously our morning briefing videos in partnership with the Fan Museum and Cospex Opticians. If you're watching over on YouTube, it'd be massive help if you could just drop us a subscribe over there, a like, drop a comment. We try and get through as many comments as we can when we do these. We Are Sunderland is live. It's a place to be for everything red and white, and it's still just £1 to subscribe for 6 months. We are running a competition over on there where you can win one of 3 pairs hospitality tickets for the final game of the season. So it's belt and prize. I think it's worth over 400 quid. Sorry for 1 pair's worth of tickets. So it's worth just subscribing, getting over there, and taking advantage of that offer. As you said, Joe, QPR at the weekend. It's a tough one to digest, isn't it? Because in my opinion, that was the worst performance since Dodds has taken interim charge.
Yeah, I think he said as much, didn't it? And that speaks so many volumes that your first point since taking back over in interim charge, you class that as your worst performance. When it's ended 6 straight defeats, but what it was just flat across the board. It was 2 teams that looked sort of every bit what they are.
Yeah.
Sunderland aside, who look like they've lost 6 games in a row, short of confidence, lacking quality in the final third. QPR, I think QPR probably showed Sunderland a little bit too much respect, if I'm honest, at times, because they were, once they got into the game, they were certainly the ones who were a little bit more on the front foot and a little bit more aggressive. And I think if they believed in themselves a little bit more, I mean, they almost won it at the end. Of course, Anthony Patterson made a really good save, but if they'd have gone for it a little bit more, I think the win was there for them, and that kind of sums up why they're in the situation that they're in. Obviously, the change of manager, he's helped. It looks as though that he's getting them more on the right track, but they did look like a side as well who just lacked quality in key areas. And what transpired was just a game of so few moments of anything really to cling on to or to look back on and reflect on, and like I said, just real moments of quality. Sunderland, from a Sunderland point of view, let's say from Anthony Patterson at the end is probably the key moment, isn't it? Because if that goes in from Chris Willock, then you're staring 7 defeats in a row on right in your face, and it's just, it was a really tough afternoon. It was a flat afternoon on the pitch, in the stands, and I said it before the Southampton game. I think when we did this, the international break has come at a really good time for Sunderland. They needed it. They've needed it for a couple of weeks, and they absolutely need it now. Mike Dodds said that to us, didn't he, after the game? They need to go and reset. I think they'd have a couple of days off and then just come back into these final 8 games, which is a tough game to start down at Cardiff, but hopefully get some bodies back and try and rejuvenate something in there, because at the moment that people are turning around looking for somebody to grab a hold of things, whether it be the game or from the dugout, and just give them a little bit of guidance, a little bit of leadership. And at the moment, that's lacking across the board. And, that opens up a whole other kind of worms, doesn't it, in terms of debate?
Yeah, I mean, we'll look at the game for what it is, and just 0 shots on target. I mean, it's something I included in, obviously, that little bit of post-match analysis, just in terms of my total point on based on Lewis Hamir. It's been tough. Look, it's hard, isn't it, not to batter a young lad who's come over. It's his first full season in senior football. But yesterday, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I just thought it was terrible. From that little focal point, again, it's hard. Like I've said, there's plenty of things that sort of you have to caveat. It's his first full season in senior football, let alone moving abroad. 20 years of age. He doesn't have a lot of experience at this level. I think, as we said, we did the team news before the game. I think it was pretty widely accepted that Nazari Grusin would have started. Mason Burstow didn't have the best game down at St Mary's at Southampton. Grusin came on again, just looked lively, but he picked up an injury and that's ruled him out. So to a degree, I understand obviously where Mike Dodds is coming from. But as I said again in the team news bit yesterday, I thought that he would have gone with Job up front. And what I found, I don't know, maybe difficult to sort of comprehend at the minute is the sort of mass fluctuation from Dodds' sort of interim tenure against West Brom and Leeds, where they've played with Job up front, and Sunderland actually looked pretty good with Job up front as a focal point. I mean, that was one of my gripes yesterday with how many times the ball sort of went into Hemir in a pretty sort of decent area, not in the final third, but just in an area where Sunderland could build. And he was just out muscled. It bounced off him. There was one or two occasions where he did show his strength, but it just broke down pretty much every time it went into him. And I think I can't remember the exact number. You'll know better because I remember you included it or you touched on it during that first half. To me, was the amount of touches he's had. And that's been part of the thing, hasn't it? They just haven't got the strikers involved at all. And yes, there is the caveat of what sort of service they're getting, and we'll get onto that in a little bit. But it was just a tough afternoon for him again, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was 16 touches that he had overall, and yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think he was. There was one incident, wasn't there, where he came quite deep towards the halfway line, and I think we both turned to each other. That's more like it, where he drew the foul, and he got to play that wide, but he drew the foul as well. And I think that's the first time that we've seen anything like that this season, really. Half a bit of that down at Norwich where he pressed him on corner, but he doesn't help himself at the moment neither. When the ball's going wide, he's not on. He's never on his toes. He's always seems flat-footed and not ready to go and break the lines and get across his man. So that limits what can come into him from a wide area as well. And at the moment, I mean, I thought Abdullah Bar was disappointing as well on Saturday. It was. You could go through the squad, to be honest. There was not many aside from Patterson who stood out really. But yeah, the shots, no shots on target is such a damning statistic at home against Queen's Park Rangers. I mean, with all due respect, we're not talking about a side like Leicester at the top of the table or Southampton who they've played in games before this. This is a side who are fighting for their lives down the bottom of the table. They're down that way for a reason at this point of the season. To not have a shot on target against them at home, the only sort of real effort was a speculative one from Dan Neil from the halfway line where he spots the keeper off the line. Great ingenuity to spot that. What a goal it would have been if it came off. But if that is your effort at goal, really, something is amiss, and it's been the case all season long, and it's it's going to be for the final 8 games as well.
Yeah, I think interestingly, I'll compare to both of QPR strikers who they played with. So Lyndon Dykes, I'm not making out he set the world alight because I thought he was pretty poor, but it's just the movement off the ball. It was just I'm going to go press that down. Okay, I might not get there, but I'm going to make an attempt to go get it. There was a stage where Hemir lost the ball, and it was just sort of trudging back. It was really difficult to watch. And again, I don't want to be overly critical of the lad, but I just don't think he's ready for Championship football. I do think, which is what again goes back to the January window. It was a moment where I thought, he would be one of the 3 most likely to go out on loan. And then when Sinclair Armstrong came on in the second half, just a big focal point. Dan Ballard bounced off him, and then obviously that Chris Willock chance was the best chance of the game, really, wasn't it? And I mean, I'll pull it up now.
That, though, have they? They've had none of that. What Armstrong did when he came on, someone who'll just come in and put himself about and make a nuisance of himself. And you mentioned Dykes as well. You could see the first 20 minutes or so, they made a concerted effort to test Dan Ballard. There was a lot of speculation whether Dan Ballard would start, risk. Would Mike Dodds take the risk? Sorry. He did in the end, and QPR certainly tested him out. And it's not going to be one of Dan Ballard's greatest games that he'll look back on. I think Sunderland and Dodds are grateful that he got through it, but there was a few hair-scaring moments, wasn't there, in those early stages where Dykes really put him on the back foot. I think he clattered into him after about a minute. He forced him into a couple of cheap turnovers, one where Anderson could have scored as well. Patterson made a good save then as well. So Sunderland have never really had that. And I think what will be concerning as such is these players they're obviously brought for the long term. I think Hemir's 5-year contract, Mayenda 5-year contract, Rusin 4-year contract with the option. You're putting a hell of a lot of faith in things improving dramatically from what we've seen this season for next year, if that's where your stock's going to be. Otherwise, are then the ownership in a situation where they're going to have to almost admit a mistake here and bring somebody like a recognised, experienced striker in, or do they double down and say, no, this is sort of our 3 that we've got, and we're going to continue developing them because we believe in them that they can reach that level? Because at the moment, and I'll include Rusyn in that as well. To be honest, they look a long way away, and Rusyn probably is the best of the three that are theirs. Burstow will probably go back to Chelsea, but yeah, all three look a long way short at the moment, and it's a big concern, not just now, just to get those final few points to ease any lingering fears. Although I think stopping that run yesterday does contribute to that. I think that that'll settle things down a little bit, but certainly next year, where there's got to be improvement, that is a big decision for them in the summer.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a piece on it over on We Are Sunderland on the site if you want to go into a little bit more detail, but I'll just pull this up now in terms of the expected goals from that game. Now, obviously, as you can see on the little sort of scale at the bottom, if it's blue, it's obviously less chance of scoring. The closer it is to red, the more chance you have of scoring. So these are the XG stats from Sunderland's game against QPR. Now, again, I don't think that includes the Dan Neil long range shot, because these are obviously efforts in the final third. The Dan Ballard, I spoke about him, but the Dan Ballard header right at the death is the closest Sunderland had to breaking, in terms of an XG chance, over 0.1, sorry. So that in itself tells its own story. Over 0.1, it's a pretty damning stat, and that was, I think, the Ballard's header came in at 0.16 XG for the entire game, and of the unexpected goals where you've got 0.43 overall, I mean, that just pretty much tells you the entire story, doesn't it? Looking at the shot map there, if you're not watching on YouTube, I'd advise you to go and have a look, because obviously it's a pretty damning stat. You've got 5 shots there, which were from open play. The only 5 shots Sunderland had from open play were all blocked. So again, they're having shots with men behind the ball, and they're not clear-cut shots on goal. It's just a pretty damning stat, that heading into the international break.
Yeah, it is. I'll quickly apologise for my dog barking there at the start of that. But no, it is. It's an issue that has been plaguing them again. You could go back to sort of Michael Beale's tenure. That is where the XG is really. We've taken note of the trend that is declining. Since December in these 3 months. Like you say, you brought it up there. It's really difficult. I mean, obviously, you taking Jack Clark out of that at the moment as well, which impacts things significantly, given, I think 19 goal contributions for him. But they don't look like mixing that up. That was one thing about the game with QPR as well. There's no sort of, like last year when we saw how free-flowing they could be, it was sort of, it got to the point where at this stage of the season, it was like, if you score 1, we'll score 2. Look back at that whole game, the 4-4, anything can sort of happen in games, and at the moment it's just drab, isn't it? It's so flat that there's no, and I think a lot of that comes down to the inexperience of on a run like this, of being able to try and find that spark of something to try and create chances. I mean, Adil Al-Shish came into the side yesterday. I think he was busy in spells, but again, Sunderland are going to need more end product from somebody like him moving forward. He's another one, we talk about long-term deals. He's another one that's on a 5-year contract where you're going to need more of an end product going forward. Yes, he's going to need more game times. I think that was on his 5th start of the season yesterday. But across the board, they need more ideas. They need more invention. And they need a little bit more belief in themselves as well, I think, which will come with experience. But to get, like I said with Hamir, to get across your man, or to maybe just take a shot and, be risky rather than play it safe, go side, side to side. We see a lot of side to side at times. Try and break the lines, because at the moment there isn't enough of that.
Yeah, and I mean, if we just go into this graph a little bit, obviously it's a 5-game rolling trend line. So this is starting from the end of Tony Mowbray's tenure. We've talked about this before. The difference there is just sort of staggering. The XG to XG conceded. I mean, that would suggest that Sunderland were pretty unlucky in terms of not scoring the goals, that the chances they were creating. But from my point of view, what's been pretty disappointing, I know you can include West Brom and Leeds and sort of say, well, there's a bit of a bounce, but there hasn't been a bounce from changing these managers, and that was something that was put across when Tony Mowbray went. Was Christian Speakman said, look, the stats are pointing to maybe what we've seen now, but it's difficult. you're just sort of foreshadowing what's to come. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think the Sunderland hierarchy, they've admitted and, held their hands up for the Beale appointment. But this has gone worse than anyone could have thought, in my opinion. Just like, even when Beale has left, obviously Dodds has come in, and again, sympathy are with Mike Dodds here, because he has had to deal with injuries. Jack Clark, it's 10 senior players out of the side, but at the same time, like team selection again, like the Job incident, I thought, I know he's got faith in these young players, but I would have thought that was an ideal game for Job to start up front and sort of stick with what served you well in the past against the West Broms and Leeds. And again, I know Jack Clark's not there, but to look at that graph there, and you've got no managerial bounce. And if anything, we're 5 games in now to Dodds' tenure, and it's actually worse than the XG conceded under Michael Beale. Now, again, it could just be, these signs continuing, but there hasn't been a bounce. And that for me has been the most alarming thing, I think.
I think this one in particular with Dodds, because he's been there for all 3, well, certainly for both Tony Mowbray, and Michael Beale, and because there is that relationship and that bond with the squad, for the not to have been an increase in certain metrics, that I agree that is a big concern. There are some managers that just don't work. Like you say, the hierarchy held their hands up and said it was a mistake with Michael Beale. Sometimes that can happen, but for them to not get another kickback from when Dodds comes back in with like I say, someone who the players respect, that is really concerning. And what it does show as well is just how much Tony Mowbray was getting out of this squad of players. I think it was used a lot of the time when the form was patchy, at the start of the season, just sort of, well, at least they're creating chances. The XG says that they are still, performing the right way or performing the way that they would like. Once that's gone, as you can see there, just it leaves so many question marks, and again, it goes back to the squad. We spoke about the strikers there and the quality and the experience and the depth. I mean, the depth is something else we can talk about from Saturday as well. The bench, I think there was 3 academy lads plus Chris Rigg on there. You had Bradley Dack, who was probably filling a seat because, he's expected to feature the under-21s during this international break, isn't he? I think that was more a case of just having, like I say, filling a squad number. You had the goalkeeper as well, and then Timothy Bembele. So there were no game changers on there, really, was there, for them? And when you're in a rut like that, and, even at 0-0, when you need someone to come on and try and change the game and get you a result, or if QPR had scored to get you back into the game, you're not having much faith to turn around that. I mean, that's not a slight on any of those young lads, because they're going to be there on merit in time to come. But it's so hard to put the onus on and the pressure on them to try and change stats like that round that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of indicative of the situation that they're in. And now I know from the press conference, obviously prior to QPR, we posted a live tweet about, obviously, Dodds came out and said that along the lines of, we don't want to be fielding the youngest team in AFL history. It's just sort of that's where we are, because we don't have the experienced heads. Now, there's quite a bit of backlash saying, coming down on Dodds' side. And I actually don't think that what he was saying was going against the club's message, so to speak. I actually think, again, the problem has been because you don't have a constant communication channel with the likes of, your sporting director. But I actually think that is consistent with the message. Yes, they want young talents, but I don't think anybody would have predicted to have 10 players out at this stage. And while I understand, again, I've been an advocate of them getting experience in January, I just think, again, it's interesting, isn't it? Because how much of these injuries are down to players being injury prone? How much is it down to, the minutes that they've had to play in recent years? Pitches. It's just, there's so many things that can play into it, and there'll never be one truth. There'll be multiple factors that play into it. But as you've said, I mean, they don't have game changers from the bench. I mean, you look back at the last 2 games heading into this, so Leicester, Southampton, and again, parachute payments will come into this. There's caveats with just about every much argument that you have, but their strength and depth. Even last year, when you look at it, you felt like Sunderland had a little bit of strength and depth. I'd even argue back to the start of this season, you had options to come off and change, change players. So injuries, they're right to point out injuries have played its part, but it doesn't make it any less difficult to watch at the moment and try and find positives in it. I think just quickly before we move on, if I'll just pull up this shot map from under Dodds. And now I think that this has been a problem that, again, exceeds beyond Mike Dodds. But you look at the shots there that Sunderland are having, and the majority of them are outside the box. They're not creating chances in the box. Yes, you're getting cutbacks, the odd one. This is since Dodds has taken over interim charge. And I mentioned it in my piece yesterday, that the best chance that Sunderland have had throughout those, I think it's 4-5 games now, was Luke O'Nine's goal, the header against Swansea at home. Other one, Nazari Rusyn's header, point blank range at Norwich, Ballard's header on Saturday. So you can name the chances off one hand nearly of clear-cut chances that Sunderland are having. The rest of them are coming from outside of the area. And that, for me, whoever comes in, it's a problem for Dodds to sort between now and the end of the year. But whoever comes in, that is what they need to sort. They need to get, like you've said earlier in this, the fluidity that they had. Because just from thinking back the last couple of games or before December, I couldn't tell you once where I've seen a Sunderland player get in behind the back line and be one-on-one with a goalkeeper or just feel like, oh, here we go, they're creating chances at will here. I couldn't name a game where I thought maybe the second half of Plymouth where I thought they're going to blow a team away here. But other than that, off the top of my head, I can't really think of any. And again, it's the problems in the final third that have plagued them all year long, and they've shown no sort of sign of letting up, have they?
No, I agree. You took the words out of my mouth with the Plymouth game as well. I think the first half against Preston New Year's Day and probably the second half against Plymouth, the 2 45 minutes since the change since Michael Beale came in until now, they're probably the 2 45 minutes that you'd cling to. Did okay in the first half down at Middlesbrough. That will have been one of those chances on there, one of the higher XGs. Bars that was saved, should have scored that one. But that, again, you look at the colour on that map there of the ranking of the expected goal of what it is. It's nowhere near clear cut, is it? Apart from those odd one or two that you're saying. And how many games sample is that?
That's 15? From that one there. Sorry, is just from the start of Dodds' tenure. So sorry. If you look back to, as you say, if you look back to the Borough ones, you will see more chances inside the area. But again, you've said them there. They're very few and far between of what chances Sunderland are having in the box. And that has been an error. Whether that, again, how do you address that? Because is it because they don't have a focal point to build off in and around the 18-yard box, or they don't have runners in behind? Obviously, you would if you had a Jack Clark and a Paddy Roberts on either side. It's really difficult, and I feel for Mike Dodds at the moment because, again, yes, his options are limited. There's what does it do for the current group of players to come out and say, look, well, we've got 10 players out. When they come back, we will improve. Sadly, that's just the situation Sunderland are in, and there's no time for niceties. Sunderland come out again and said that they want to get to the Premier League as soon as possible. Now, that's all fair and well. And again, recruitment, I think we'll mention it every single video. That's been the downfall, but you have to, looking at what they've got, I think I spoke with Dan Neil after the game, and he said, look, this needs to be a big reset. And I completely agree with him. I completely agree that yes, it hasn't come at a good time, given the sense that you want to firmly put this run to the, behind you. But in the sense of just take a moment to breathe, take stock, get some bodies back in, and almost treat it like a mini pre-season and go from there. I think that's the only way they can sort of look at this 2-week period.
Yeah, they've got to. I think what's pretty sort of indicative of where they're at, Mowbray said it, Beale said it, and you're now getting Mike Dodds saying it as well. I think he said it was this week's press conference, wasn't it, before the Queen's Park Rangers game, where, to paraphrase, it was sort of, we don't want to be going in against Premier League opposition players, Premier League budgets with as many young players as we've got. It's far from ideal, I think was the line that he used. How many, Alex Neil said it in the recent interview that came out last week as well. How many more times can this be said before a decision sort of made where they need to sort of bend the way that they're approaching this? Because it feels as though, like, you saw the games. I mean, you went down to Southampton. We were both there against Leicester. I was down there at Norwich, who are obviously pushing to get back up there. These are teams that look a hell of a lot closer at the moment than Sunderland. And considering where Sunderland were last year, that is why there's so much frustration.
Yeah.
Because it felt like when you came off the back of last season, that was the time to really push on and try and break into that. Not necessarily into the top two, because that is always going to be difficult. That, you know, the more that the gap between the Premier League and the Championship continues to grow, that is going to be difficult. But at least consolidate in the top six. And I think the thing you would say is, it's the same for quite a few. There's a few teams that have done. I mean, Middlesbrough are a classic example. You know, they've almost followed the same route in terms of the drop off this season, where Coventry have in and around it, but you know, they've struggled more than what they did last season.
Yeah,
it shows you how difficult the league is, but it also shows that if you stand still in this league, you'll go back. You know, you need to keep moving forward, and to go full circle with what it was for this game and things. It just shows you where they're still lacking in those key areas. And like you say, with the strength and depth, you can go on about the 10 players, and, you know, Clark in particular and Roberts are the two, but 09 as well, probably for defence. You know, we spoke about him a couple of weeks ago in terms of him and Ballard being the two that you'd need at centre-back. But that happens. You know, teams
that's football.
Down the division, that happens. You have to find a way to deal with it, and that's where your squad depth comes into it. And as we saw on Saturday, some don't have that at the moment.
Yeah, I think, again, just all signs point towards the summer, don't they, in terms of what comes next? Because, again, you know, I've said for the past couple of weeks, I don't think Sunderland will go down unless there's a massive sort of fluctuation. I mean, to be fair, that QPR performance was worrying, but I do agree with Dodds in the sense that when they get the more experienced players back, that should just give them a lift. It'll give the squad a lift. You've then got more bodies on the bench, you know. But it's difficult, isn't it? It's so difficult not to completely write the season off. I think if you get one or two wins, that firmly puts you safe from relegation, and that gives you a platform to then build into next year. But we've touched on it again numerous times. This summer is so important. It's all fair and well, as we've said, you know, speaking, you know, this might happen, that might happen. You can't afford to have a repeat of a summer and January transfer window like they've had this year. You already, in theory, this is how things should work. Obviously, they don't always pan out this way. But Sunderland have recruited the youngsters. So from a theoretical point of view, you already have them. You're still developing them. But what you do now, and what the model in theory should do, would be, if you sell Jack Clark, now's your opportunity. Now's your window to go in and bring in more experienced players who are more at the level of the Championship, and go from there. Now, whether that happens, it'll remain to be seen, but that's very much where they are, isn't it? And again, it's difficult not to write the season off. But yeah, it's tough at the minute.
I think even if you use the QPR game as an example, you know, you had, and I might not be thankful for saying this, but you had Isaac Hayden in there for them in defensive midfield. Just an experienced head. You know, you could see what that did in terms of just breaking Sunderland's sort of play up in that number 10 role. Sunderland don't necessarily have that. We've spoke before, haven't we, about Neil and Ekwa being in there.
Yeah.
Are they both suited to being a little bit further forward? You know, it's a position that Sunderland have needed since Corey Evans got injured.
Yeah.
As much as we speak about the striker, that is another one. You could go through areas of the team, and once Jack Clark will get sold in the summer, we're finding out the limitations of the squad without him. You know, seems a little harsh to say that they're a one-man team, but this run of form lately since he's been injured, you know, it only points one way, doesn't it? And it kind of tells you how much of an impact, even when he's had off days as such, what he can do. When we spoke about the Plymouth game before, about getting him behind, the goal he scored that day, one time that did get him behind, he ended up going into the channel, but then went round the houses before scoring from the edge of the area. You know, they don't have anyone else that can do that, really. So so many things, you know, there's so many moving parts that they need to address in the summer. And it's important, like you say, to use it as a pre-season, this 8-game mini-season, because you can see the fan base is frustrated, rightfully frustrated with what's happening. Things are dwindling and they need something to cling to. We spoke about Chris Reid possibly being that before. The results ultimately are what are going to help, because that's what we're in the industry for, isn't it?
Yeah, I think as well, just to sort of round things up nicely, I think as well, it sounds stupid to say winning games of football, that's what's important. It is. But it's extra important given the situation that Sunderland find themselves in. As you said, they've gone from being this side that finished in the playoffs in 6 to this season now potentially finishing in mid-table. And again, that could have happened last year. It didn't. They finished in 6. They were a playoff side last year. That's the facts of the matter. This year, if they finish mid-table and you lose Jack Clark, are they then viewed as an attractive proposition? Whoever finishes inside that top 6, they're now the playoff team. There's so many things that, again, moving parts roll into one thing. It's massive. It's massive. This final run-in, they need to end the season strong, either to prove to themselves, prove to the fans, because look, they have got quality. It's just we haven't seen it. They haven't seen it, and they're in a real rut at the moment. And to a degree, I agree with Dodds that I think once they do get a win, they'll get another. But like we've seen throughout the entirety of the season, they haven't been able to string together a proper run of form that saw them finish in the playoffs last year. That's been a constant issue throughout the whole season. Sorry, and I think what's interesting is, look, I'm not saying the QPR result should be celebrated as a draw. No, by no means am I saying that. But they haven't done that enough this year. They haven't drawn enough games. They've lost. Look, it sounds again silly to say, they've lost too many games last season. If you don't, just the Southampton game, like a clear picture of what they needed to do. 2-2. You've played poorly for the whole of the first half. You've fought your way back into a game, and it was naivety to look. I get why they've gone to try and push because they're in that losing run, but just take a point and run back to the Stadium of Light, and then the feeling going into the QPR game might have been different.
Yeah, and I think that's why it was as poor as Saturday was across the board. That is why it was so important not to lose that game as well.
Yeah,
because it doesn't feel any much better whatsoever, but it stops that run. It was the first clean sheet since New Year's Day as well. That just something else, just something for them to cling on to over this break. Like Mike Dodds said, go away, spend time with the families, come back in. They'll debrief it because he clearly wasn't happy with the performance, rightly so, and then just totally reset and go again. And if there is players back, and if they can get, because there are some good games in the sense of if you can get a result in them, can give you a little bit of a boost in morale in this closing stretch. Going down to Cardiff would be what a good result that would be if you get one there.
Yeah,
you've got to go to Ellen Road, under the lights. I think that's on the telly as well. What a great night that could be if you could go and get a result there. They're flying. So there are games, West Brom, another one. There are games there where if you can go and get a result, that can just give you a little bit of confidence internally. I'm talking about the fan base. It's going to be almost what it is from now until the end of the season. But internally, it's so important that they can just go and get a couple of results just to give them something. And like you said, in terms of potential transfers as well, because that will be a factor. You have to think it will be a factor for players who might consider it.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I don't want to blanket the entire fan base with this, but I think it's fair to say that a large portion of them are losing a bit of faith at the moment. And again, the results on the pitch will also define that. But I think, just you've got season ticket renewals coming up.
Yeah.
You want to, you need to get a little bit of a bounce going into that. You need to get this feel-good factor back. And how you do that? Simple, just winning football games. I mean, I think even, you talk about winning games and winning them in different fashions and different manners. Like if Sunderland just won a game 1-0, gritty performance, nobody would care. That's it. They've won a game. You've stopped that run. As you've said there's some big games coming up, some big games. And I think their away form as well. That's worth mentioning, that their away form has been far from ideal this year. I mean,
after last year as well, where they were fourth, I think they were fourth best in the Championship in terms of their away form. For it to drop off like that, that was the foundation of them getting into the playoffs last year. Ironically, the home form is what's tipped them over this year, but the last couple of weeks, that's also dropping off as well. And that's something that you don't want to let that sort of edge into next season as well, going, a prolonged period over the last couple of months without winning at home. So there's so many things for them to address, and this international break, it's key in that aspect for the whole sort of team, staff, players, everyone in that building to really regroup and try and make sense of A, what's gone on, and B, how they can sort this out. Maybe flip them around, because something like they have to try and finish this season a hell of a lot better than what the last couple of months have been.
Yeah, just like Sunderland, we will draw a line in the sand there. We'll be back on Wednesday and Friday again in our usual slots. We might have a special one coming up for you this week. Obviously, we've done a bit with Stephen Aziz. We'll be putting out his full interview, but behind obviously our subscription paywall. It's just £1 for 6 months. You get tactical analysis, exclusive interviews, insight from former players, and obviously the stats bomb analysis that we've just shown you. In this, you get that in greater depth over on our website. If you are watching on YouTube, please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment on the video. It'd be massive help for us. And yeah, catch you later.